10-year-old Prince Rogers Nelson stood frozen behind the curtain at Central High School's auditorium. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. The guitar hanging from his thin shoulder felt impossibly heavy, like it was pulling him down through the floor. Beyond that curtain, 300 students waited. Laughing. Talking. Having no idea that the quiet kid with the afro was about to walk out there alone. His fingers touched the guitar strings and they felt like ice. "I can't do this," he whispered to himself. But he had to. Because at home, nobody saw him. Nobody heard him. On that stage, for 3 minutes, someone would finally listen. He didn't know it then. That terrified moment behind the curtain would change music history forever. Years later, when Prince became the biggest star in the world, journalists asked him about confidence. About fearlessness. About his legendary control. He would smile that mysterious smile and change the subject. He never told them the truth. That he was still that 10-year-old boy. Still shaking. Still terrified. Still proving to himself, over and over, that he deserved to be heard. The first performance never ends. It just gets bigger stages and brighter lights. But the fear stays the same. Before we dive into this story, if you want to hear untold moments that shaped history, hit that subscribe button. This channel brings you the truth behind the legends. Minneapolis, 1968. Inside the small house on Logan Avenue North, 10-year-old Prince Rogers Nelson had learned to be invisible. His parents had divorced 3 years earlier, and the aftermath had turned his childhood into a battlefield. His mother had remarried, and the stepfather who moved in brought a different kind of energy into their home. Anger. Volume. Unpredictability. Prince learned quickly that the safest way to survive was to disappear. Stay quiet. Stay small. Don't draw attention. But disappearing came with a cost. When you make yourself invisible to avoid pain, you also become invisible to love, to recognition, to being seen as someone who matters. And deep inside that quiet, small boy, something was screaming to be noticed. Music became his only voice. When his stepfather's rage filled the house, Prince would slip down to the basement where his father's abandoned instruments gathered dust. A piano. Drums. A bass guitar. He would touch them carefully, like they were sacred objects. And in a way, they were. Because when he played, the chaos upstairs faded. When he played, he existed. When he played, he mattered. By age 10, Prince had taught himself basic piano and guitar. Not from lessons. Not from teachers. Just from listening to records and watching other musicians with an intensity that bordered on obsession. James Brown's precision. Jimi Hendrix's wildness. Sly Stone's fearless genre fusion. He absorbed everything, filtering it through his own strange lens, building something that didn't exist yet. But there was a problem. All this musical ability lived in a basement. In shadows. In silence. Nobody at school knew Prince could play. Nobody in his neighborhood had heard him. His stepfather certainly didn't care. The music was trapped inside him, and it was suffocating him. Then his music teacher, Mr. Hamilton, made an announcement that would change everything. Central High School was organizing a talent show. Students could perform anything they wanted. Solo acts. Bands. Whatever. It was voluntary. Optional. Safe to ignore. Prince sat in the back of the classroom and felt his heart hammering. This was it. This was the moment. He could stay invisible forever, or he could step into the light. Both options terrified him. For 3 days, Prince carried the permission slip in his pocket. He would take it out during lunch, smooth the creases, read it over and over. Student Talent Showcase. Parent's signature required. Parent signature. That meant asking. That meant explaining. That meant making himself visible at home, which was the one place he had learned never to be. On the third night, Prince waited until his stepfather left for the evening. His mother was in the kitchen, tired from her shift at a local diner. He approached her with the paper folded into a small square, his hands trembling. "Mama," he said quietly. "There's a show at school. Music. I want to." He couldn't finish the sentence. His mother looked at him with surprise. She knew he played in the basement. She heard him sometimes through the floorboards. But she had never asked about it, never encouraged it, never wanted to draw his stepfather's attention to anything that might cause conflict. She looked at her son, the small, quiet boy who asked for nothing, who caused no trouble, who disappeared into corners. And she signed the paper. No questions. No big conversation. Just her name on the line. Prince took the paper and walked back to his room. He had done it. He was committed now. There was no backing out. In 2 weeks, he would stand on a stage in front of everyone. And the thought made him want to throw up. The next 2 weeks were torture. Every day at school, Prince watched the other performers prepare. Groups of popular kids rehearsing dance routines in the gym. The school star vocalist practicing in the music room, her voice confident and strong. A rock band made up of seniors, all of them laughing and joking, completely comfortable with the idea of performance. And then there was Prince. Alone. Practicing in his basement after school, where nobody could hear him make mistakes. He had chosen to play guitar and sing a song he had written himself. It wasn't a cover. It wasn't something safe and familiar. It was his own creation, a strange fusion of funk and rock that didn't sound like anything on the radio. Looking back, that choice reveals everything about who Prince would become. Even at 10 years old, even terrified, even with every instinct screaming at him to play it safe, he refused to be anything other than himself. But that authenticity came with a price. Doubt. Every night, lying in bed, he would imagine the performance going wrong. Forgetting the words. Breaking a guitar string. His voice cracking. The audience laughing. The humiliation. The confirmation that he should have stayed invisible. His friend André Simon was one of the few people who knew about the performance. André's family, the Andersons, had become Prince's refuge. Their house on Russell Avenue was where Prince felt closest to safe, closest to seen. André tried to encourage him. "You're better than everyone," André told him. "You're going to blow their minds." But Prince couldn't believe it. Talent didn't matter if you froze. If you couldn't deliver. If the fear won. The night before the show, Prince barely slept. He lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling like he was falling. Part of him wanted to get sick. A real fever, something that would let him cancel without it being cowardice. But his body betrayed him by staying healthy. Morning came. The day of the show. Prince moved through his classes like a ghost. Teachers called on him and he barely heard them. Lunch tasted like cardboard. The afternoon stretched into eternity. And then the final bell rang. Students flooded toward the auditorium. And Prince walked toward the backstage entrance, guitar case in hand, feeling like he was walking toward his own execution. The backstage area of Central High School's auditorium was chaos. Performers everywhere, chattering nervously, adjusting costumes, warming up voices. The popular kids huddled in groups, feeding off each other's confidence. The rock band was tuning instruments loudly, showing off. And in the corner, sitting on an equipment case with his guitar across his lap, was Prince. Alone. Silent. Invisible even here. Mr. Hamilton, the music teacher organizing the show, walked through with a clipboard, checking off names and performance order. When he reached Prince, he paused. "You're doing a solo?" he asked, surprised. Prince nodded. "Original song?" Another nod. Mr. Hamilton looked at the small, quiet student and something flickered across his face. Concern maybe. Or curiosity. "You're fifth in the lineup," he said gently. "You'll go after the dance group and before the band. You got this?" Prince nodded again, not trusting his voice. Mr. Hamilton moved on, and Prince was alone again with his fear. Through the curtain, he could hear the auditorium filling up. 300 students. Maybe more. The murmur of conversation, laughter, the scraping of chairs. The sound of an audience that had no idea what was coming. The show began. Prince watched from the wings as the first performers took the stage. A girl doing a dramatic monologue. Her voice was strong, trained. She got polite applause. Then a dance crew, 6 popular kids doing a synchronized routine to a current hit. The audience went wild. Screaming, clapping, whistling. The dancers fed off that energy, smiling huge, clearly loving every second. Then a comedy duo doing sketches that mostly fell flat. Scattered laughs, awkward pauses. Then another singer, a senior girl with a beautiful voice doing a Whitney Houston cover. She brought the energy back up. The audience loved her. And then Mr. Hamilton was beside Prince, touching his shoulder gently. "You're next," he said. Prince stood. His legs felt like water. His hands were shaking so badly he almost dropped his guitar. He walked toward the stage entrance, and with each step, a voice in his head screamed at him to turn around, to run, to stay safe in the shadows where he belonged. Prince stepped through the curtain and the auditorium hit him like a physical force. Lights. Hundreds of faces. The sudden silence as the audience registered the small, skinny kid with an afro walking out alone. No backup band. No dancers. Just him and a guitar that looked too big for his frame. He walked to the microphone at center stage. His footsteps echoed. Someone in the back rows laughed, just a small sound, but it cut through Prince like a knife. He reached the mic and stood there, frozen. The lights were blinding. He couldn't see individual faces anymore, just a dark mass of judgment staring back at him. His hands found the guitar. His fingers positioned on the frets. He opened his mouth to introduce himself and nothing came out. Just silence. Painful, stretching silence. The audience shifted. Uncomfortable. Someone coughed. Prince could feel it slipping away. Could feel the moment dying before he even started. And then, something happened. In his mind, he wasn't on that stage anymore. He was back in the basement. Safe. Alone. Where music was the only thing that mattered. Where there was no audience to judge him. Just him and the sound. His fingers moved. The first chord rang out through the auditorium. Not tentative. Not apologetic. Clear. Strong. Perfect. The sound froze the audience. This wasn't what they expected. This wasn't a kid fumbling through Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. This was real. This was music that had weight, that had soul, that came from somewhere deep. Prince's voice followed the guitar. His singing voice was nothing like his speaking voice. When he sang, something unlocked. A confidence that didn't exist anywhere else in his life poured out of him. The lyrics were his own, strange and poetic, about feeling invisible, about wanting to be seen, about music being the only honest language he knew. The audience went silent. Not the uncomfortable silence from before. This was attention. Real attention. 300 students who had been chattering and laughing and barely paying attention suddenly stopped. Because something was happening on that stage. Something unexpected. Something real. Prince's fingers moved across the guitar strings with impossible precision for a 10-year-old. His rhythm was tight. His voice was raw but controlled. And most importantly, he wasn't performing anymore. He was surviving. This was what he did in the basement when the world was too much. This was his escape. His only honest expression. And for 3 minutes, he let everyone see it. The song built. Prince's voice climbed into a falsetto that shouldn't have been possible for his age. The guitar work got more complex, more aggressive. He wasn't trying to be impressive. He was just being himself, completely and without apology. And that authenticity hit the audience harder than any technical skill could have. Students who had been ready to mock this weird quiet kid were now leaning forward. Teachers standing in the back were exchanging shocked glances. Even the senior rock band waiting backstage had stopped tuning their instruments to listen. Because they recognized something. This wasn't a talented kid. This was something else. Something that doesn't have a name when you're 10 years old but will eventually be called genius. The final chord rang out. Prince held it, letting it sustain and fade naturally. And then silence. Complete silence. For a moment that felt like hours, Prince stood there in the lights, alone, vulnerable, waiting for judgment. And then the auditorium exploded. Applause. Not polite clapping. Real applause. Cheering. Whistling. Students were on their feet. Teachers were clapping. Even the cynical seniors were nodding with respect. Prince stood there, stunned. He hadn't expected this. Hadn't allowed himself to hope for this. He gave a small, awkward bow and walked off stage on shaking legs. Backstage, everything changed. Students who had never spoken to Prince before were suddenly surrounding him. That was incredible. Where did you learn to play like that? Did you really write that yourself? Prince nodded, overwhelmed, not knowing how to handle attention when he had spent his entire life avoiding it. The rock band seniors approached him with something like respect in their eyes. You got a band? One of them asked. Prince shook his head. You should, the senior said. You're too good to be playing alone. But Prince didn't know how to explain that alone was the only way he knew how to be. That sharing music meant sharing control, and control was the only thing keeping him safe. Mr. Hamilton found him in the chaos. Prince, he said, and there was something in his voice that made Prince look up. That was special. You know that, right? That was really special. Prince didn't know what to say. Special felt dangerous. Special meant expectations. Special meant people watching. But special also meant seen. And for a boy who had spent his life invisible, being seen felt like water after dying of thirst. The rest of the talent show continued, but Prince barely registered it. He sat in the wings, guitar case at his feet, trying to process what had just happened. The audience's reaction kept echoing in his mind. The applause. The cheering. The way people looked at him after. Like he was someone. Like he mattered. When the show ended and students filtered out of the auditorium, several stopped to talk to him. Some wanted to know if he'd perform again. Others just wanted to say they liked it. A girl from his math class, someone who had never acknowledged his existence, smiled at him. You were amazing, she said. And then she was gone. Prince walked home alone that evening, guitar case in hand, feeling like the world had shifted. The streets looked the same. His house looked the same. But something fundamental had changed. He had been invisible his entire life. And then, for 3 minutes, he had been seen. Really seen. And the scary part, the part that would define the rest of his existence, was that now he needed it. Needed to be seen. Needed to be heard. Needed the stage like he needed air. The performance hadn't cured his fear. If anything, it made it worse. Because now he knew what he had to lose. After that night, Prince changed. Not dramatically. Not in ways most people would notice. He was still quiet. Still small. Still that weird kid who didn't quite fit anywhere. But something inside him had awakened, and it was hungry. He started performing whenever he could. Small gigs. School assemblies. Local community centers. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that paid. But every time he stepped on a stage, the same thing happened. The fear would try to consume him. His hands would shake. His stomach would twist. And then he would play. And the fear would transform into something else. Power. Control. Purpose. He formed his first real band with André Simon. They called themselves Grand Central, later changing to Champagne. They played funk, rock, soul, everything blended together in ways that shouldn't have worked but did. Prince wrote the songs, arranged the parts, made all the decisions. His bandmates thought he was just ambitious. They didn't understand. Every compromise felt like dying. Every shared decision felt like giving someone the power to hurt him. The stage was the only place he had control. The only place he felt safe. And he would do anything to protect it. By his teenage years, Prince was spending every spare moment on music. While other kids were at parties, he was practicing. While they were dating, he was writing songs. While they were figuring out who they wanted to be, Prince already knew. He was going to be the biggest star in the world. Not because he wanted fame, but because fame meant never being invisible again. Fame meant never being that terrified 10-year-old behind the curtain. Fame meant control. Teachers noticed his obsession. Some encouraged it. Others worried. You need balance, his guidance counselor told him. You need to think about backup plans. But Prince didn't have backup plans. This was survival. Music wasn't a career choice. It was the only way he knew how to exist. At 18, he recorded a demo that would change his life. Playing every instrument himself. Producing it himself. Controlling every element. Because that first performance had taught him something crucial. When you step on stage alone, when you have nobody else to depend on, when it's just you and the music and the audience, you can't get hurt. You can't be betrayed. You can't be left vulnerable. You're in control. And control, for Prince, was the only safety he'd ever known. Warner Brothers Records signed him in 1978. They gave him something almost no 19-year-old had ever received: complete creative control. They did it because the demo was undeniable. But they didn't understand what they were really giving him. They were giving a traumatized kid who had learned to survive through control the keys to his own fortress. For You, his debut album, featured Prince playing all 27 instruments himself. Critics called it impressive. They had no idea it was compulsive. He couldn't share the work because sharing meant trusting, and trusting meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant going back to being that invisible boy in a house full of rage. Over the next decade, Prince would become everything that 10-year-old had dreamed of. Purple Rain would make him the biggest star on the planet. He would play to stadiums full of people. Millions would know his name. He would have control over every aspect of his art, his image, his life. But here's what nobody understood. That first performance, that terrified moment behind the curtain at Central High School, never ended. Every show, every album, every moment in the spotlight was Prince proving again that he deserved to be seen. The applause never lasted long enough. The success never felt secure enough. Because deep down, he was still that scared kid, waiting for the audience to laugh, waiting for the moment when everyone would realize he shouldn't be there. The tragedy of Prince's life wasn't his death in 2016. The tragedy was that he spent 50 years running from a fear that was created in a single childhood moment. That 3-minute performance at age 10 gave him purpose, gave him power, gave him a way to survive. But it also trapped him. Because once you learn that being seen requires performing, you can never stop performing. You can never relax. You can never be vulnerable. You can never let people see the scared kid behind the legend. Prince died at 57, one of the most successful artists in history. But in his final moments, alone in an elevator at Paisley Park, maybe he was back behind that curtain again. 10 years old. Terrified. Trying to find the courage to step into the light. The first performance never ends. The fear never goes away. You just learn to walk on stage despite it. And for 3 minutes at a time, you remember what it feels like to matter. That's the real story of Prince's first performance. Not that a talented kid played a good show. But that a terrified, invisible boy found the only way he would ever feel safe. And it cost him everything.